How we doing? Hi. Good, love to hear it. Did you guys enjoy the first part of your tour?
Yeah.
Nice. Does anybody remember who their driver was?
Yeah.
Cool, alright. So, like she said, my name is Katia, and right in front of us, this is the Grub. Now, all of our 3-horse teams have team names. Like, for an example, we have a team of 3 Belgian horses named the Waffles. These guys are the Grubs because of our team mascot. From left to right, we have PK, Richard, and Grub. Now, Grub is really large, he's really lazy, really grubby, by God's name. So, everybody knows Grub on the island. So, within 3 of our Belgian horses, they might have distinguished two in the first part of your tour, but I'll talk about them a little bit further on in the tour. So what I want to do first, I want to point out that this part is going to be a little bit different than the first part of your tour. Because if you look to the right, what do you see? Trees. Trees. Look to the left. Trees, right? So there's not a whole lot for you to point out. This is just a whole hour of us sitting here staring at each other. Right? So I like to take this part of the tour to get to know you guys a little bit better. So in the front row, where are you guys from?
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Anyone else from Michigan?
Yeah.
Hi. Anyone from Ohio? Yeah, I wouldn't raise my hand either. I'm just kidding. I'm from New Mexico. I don't know anything about Michigan and Ohio, but I still like making that joke. But all of us up here would like to welcome you to the Mackinac Island State Park, established 1895. Now, we are actually originally a national park. We're the second national park in the entire world, right after Yellowstone. Eventually, they decided they didn't want us as a national park anymore, so they handed us over to Michigan State, and we became Michigan's first ever state park. Now, if you look into the trees, you'll notice that it's kind of a mess right there. There's down trees on the ground, there's foliage, all that kind of stuff, dried leaves. That's usually the kind of thing that a state park would pick up, and we don't do that here. That's because, as I might have told you on the first part of your tour, Mackinac Island only has a couple feet of topsoil on it. So we're trying to let all of that stuff naturally decompose. We're kind of playing the long game. It takes 500 years to get 1 inch of topsoil. So we're getting there. Yeah, so like I said, Grub is really big, really lazy. So he is not pulling his weight here. I have a bar right in front of me called the evener, so I can tell exactly who's pulling and who's not. Yeah, so Grub really doesn't like to pull. Come on, Grub. But like I was saying, we've got all that stuff down back there. Okay. Easy. And it's kind of a fire hazard. Mackinac Island is actually extremely flammable. If we had a wildfire here, it would level the entire island in 24 hours. So, we're really serious about our fire safety here. You would have seen our first fire station downtown, but we actually have 3. One downtown that way, one in that direction, and one that way. All of our firefighters live inside of the fire stations, and they have those fancy little electric bike things to get around really fast. The response time is pretty crazy. We actually did have a house fire downtown a couple weeks ago, if you guys know about that. You can still see the scars on that house from Marquette Park. I was actually in Marquette Park when it started. I was not responsible, but it was pretty crazy to see the response of our firefighters. It took them 45 seconds to get there. Yeah, pretty neat. That kind of brings me into the 3 rules on Mackinac Island. The first one is there is no camping. That's kind of weird, right? Because 83% of this island is a state park. And usually state parks are all about the camping, the hiking, the fishing, all that kind of stuff. But not on Mackinac Island. And that's because of the second rule, which is there are no campfires. Now, for obvious reasons, it'd be really dangerous if one of those fires got out of control. So there are no fires here. It's really, really strict against the fire policy. Now, the third rule, if you guys look all around, you'll see all this plant life on the ground. Now, it's summertime, so they aren't flowering anymore, but these are actually all flowers. So we've got some really cool flowers here, like the trilliums, creeping myrtles, lady slippers, all that kind of stuff. Our flowers are really pretty to look at. Not so pretty to touch. But you can actually get huge fines for picking the flowers back there. Even just a dandelion is $100. We did have a guy who came back here a couple years ago and wanted to pick a bouquet for his girlfriend. So he walked out of the state park with a bouquet and a $15,000 fine. Happy Valentine's Day. Okay? This is actually the first thing I get to point out on our tour today, though. This is the St. Anne's Catholic Cemetery. But these cemeteries actually weren't always located here. You guys remember those buildings downtown, the Twilight and the Windsor, the green and white ones? Yeah, that's where these cemeteries actually were. In the 1900s, they decided it was probably bad for tourism. People hopped off the boat, and the first thing they saw was a bunch of dead people. So they brought them all back here. But they did kind of do it in a funky way. So they brought everybody up out of the ground, wrote their names on top of their caskets in chalk. Then they moved the headstones first, and they waited a few days to move the caskets. Now, like I said, those names are written in chalk. We are in Michigan. It did rain. We're pretty sure everyone's where they're supposed to be. Kind of cross your fingers on that one. Now, the oldest grave in this cemetery dates back to 1831, and it belongs to a girl named Mary Biddle. Now, Mary has a pretty tragic backstory attached to her name. In 1831, the Biddle family was trying to cross the ice bridge that forms between Mackinac Island and St. Ignace. Now, Mary wandered away from her family, and she got lost, and she fell through a weak spot in the ice. They managed to pull her up, but she later died of pneumonia. Now, Mary was only 8 years old when she died. Her father, Edward Biddle, he decided that was never going to happen to anyone else. He rounded up everybody's old Christmas trees, and he lined the strongest part of the ice bridge with those trees so that no one could get lost. That's actually still a tradition they use to this day. Every year after Christmas, everyone donates their old Christmas trees, and they line the strongest part of the ice bridge with those trees. Now they use snowmobiles to get across rather than horses, which I would probably prefer to. Okay. Now we have had a couple different sayings that have originated from cemeteries. So in the 1800s, we had a really big problem with burying people alive. We had a lot of weird chemicals in our blood, and some of those were actually activated by alcohol. So if you drank too much, you could actually go into a temporary coma. Now, in the 1800s, we weren't very good at distinguishing between a coma and death. So it was a really big problem. It was actually such a big issue that we had to invent a new type of coffin. And then it was a coffin that had a hole in it. So when someone was buried, they could drop a string down into the coffin, and if they were to wake up, they could pull that string, and it would ring a bell that was attached to the front of the cemetery. So if you were walking through the graveyard at nighttime and you heard that bell going off, you got yourself a dead ringer, right? And if you woke up inside one of those coffins, you pulled the string, and someone came and pulled you out of the ground, you were saved by the bell, right? Yeah. That's also where the term graveyard shift comes from, because somebody always had to be in the cemetery to make sure that that bell didn't ring. Usually. Now, coming up on our left here is the United States Post Cemetery. Okay. Now this is for soldiers that were stationed at Fort Mackinac. There are 108 graves in that cemetery, and we know the names of 38 soldiers buried there. That's because when they were originally buried, they were commemorated with wooden crosses, but as we know now, wood and weather don't mix very well, so we lost a lot of information about those soldiers. Now, since we only know 38 of those names, that's why that United States flag there is always flown at half-mast. Now, there are actually only 5 places in the entire world where the United States flag is always flown at half-mast. Anybody have any guesses? Arlington. Gettysburg. Normandy, France. Punchbowl, Hawaii. And Mackinac Island. Now, on our right, this is the backside of the Catholic cemetery here. Come on, guys, step up. Now, there actually are a whole bunch of ghost stories associated with this Catholic cemetery. Actually, there's ghost stories associated with this entire island. Ghost hunters have been here a few times. They've done episodes on Rifle Range and at Mission Point. That's not applicable to my tour, just like saying. But we are going to come up to a little arch here, and I'm going to take a stop for a sec, because I want to point out a couple things about this arch. There are 3 problems with this archway right here. The first thing is, if you've been downtown, you might have seen the St. Anne's Catholic Chapel there, and you might have noticed that St. Anne's is spelled with an E. so they misspelled it on the arch. The second thing is that date right there says 1924, but if you guys remember, the oldest grave in that cemetery dates back to 1831, so that date is wrong as well. But the third problem, do you guys see that road? They missed the arch. Right? Yeah, they missed the arch. Now there actually is a reason for that. If you guys went in the Surrey Hill Museum at the top of the hill, you might have seen our antique hearse in there. PK, get up. Now it's pretty neat. It was actually built in the 1800s and we still use it today. But that arch was built so that the hearse could go through it. So the man who built the arch, he measured the width of the horses fit. He measured the height of the hearse fit. What he didn't take into account is that when I drive this carriage, I sit right here. When you drive a hearse, you sit on top. So he didn't actually account for the height of the driver. And if you were to drive that hearse through the archway, you'd have yourself a headless horseman. It's okay, you guys won't have to laugh. That's not where to go. So moving on, now we're coming up on what I like to call Mackinac Island's biggest disappointment. Okay. You guys can see it's that thing that doesn't look like a skull and doesn't look like a cave. There it is. Now, that cave actually used to be so large that we could fit this entire carriage inside of it, horses included. But obviously we can't anymore. That's because in the 1900s we had a very special group of people come in. They wore a lot of tie-dye. You can see that they would go into that cave to inspect the stones. You know what I mean? Now, the smoke from their stone inspections actually started to weaken the ceiling of that cave. So parts of it started to collapse, and they had to fill it up with gravel and sand to make sure that it wouldn't actually collapse on anybody. Hold on, I'm having some technical difficulties. Alright, so even before that cave was filled in, it never actually looked like a skull. So how did it get the name Skull Cave? Oh, great question, thanks for asking, I'll tell you. It all goes back to 1760, with the French and Indian War. Now the English won that war, but the indigenous people didn't like the English that took up residence on the island. So in 1763, the tribe staged a revolt against the Englishmen. But one of the Native American chiefs, whose name was Wawatam, was blood brothers with one of the Englishmen whose name was Alexander Henry. Since they were blood brothers, Wawatam was entitled to save Alexander Henry's life. And how he did that is the night before the revolt, he went to Alexander and told him, hey, stay in this cave for a night, don't come out or you'll probably die. So Alexander Henry is sleeping in that cave, and he writes in his journals that you can actually read on the island, this is the worst night's sleep he's ever had. He's tossing, he's turning, there's sticks and stones poking in his back, he just can't get comfortable. Now, eventually he passes out of sheer exhaustion, but the next day he wakes up, and the sun has risen, is lighting up his cave, and he realizes that he's actually been sleeping on a big pile of skulls and bones. Wawatam had actually hidden him inside of a Native American burial chamber because he knew that the indigenous people wouldn't risk going inside of it. Come on, guys. So that's how Skull Cave got its name. Now, what's happening now? Come on, guys. Step up. Grub. Buddy. Give me another step. Little bit more. Good boy. Go. That was a pretty steep hill, so we're going to give our boys a break real quick. This is rifle range that we're at right now. If you look to the left, all the way on top of that hill, you can see a flagpole. That flag is waving at half-mast right now. Yeah. That up there is Fort Holmes, and that flagpole marks the highest point on the island. All the way down to the right, that is Fort Mackinac there. And from Fort Mackinac to this spot right here is exactly 600 yards. So if there was no wartime going on at the fort, the soldiers there didn't have a whole lot to do, so they just hang out, they drink and shoot and do all that Michigan stuff, you know. But because of that, they actually got really, really good at shooting. So from Fort Mackinac, those soldiers could shoot a target located right here accurately without a scope. Now, even today, that's incredibly impressive. So Fort Mackinac actually produced the first sharpshooters of the entire world.
Wow.
To the left right here, you'll see this little wooden fence. Now that actually marks the highest water line on the entire island. So during the Ice Age, everything except for Fort Holmes up there was actually underwater. Actually, Fort Holmes was the only place in all of Upper Michigan that was above water during the Ice Age. So all these little valleys and rivers over here are places that mark receding water lines on the island. Alright, so I want to point something out. You guys might have noticed that sometimes when we stop and then we start again, the carriage kind of lurches forward a couple feet. That's because PK really likes to do something really funny. When we stop, he likes to do a thing that we call sitting in his harness. So you can tell that that band on his butt's really tight right now. That means he's sitting down. So to do that, he has to back up a whole lot. So when we start again, we lurch forward a lot. Grub kind of does the same thing. So he's funny. He does it a lot. But I do like to give you guys a little bit of a warning right here. Our buddy Grub on the right-hand side has this really neat quirk where he likes to walk into trees. So he really likes to do it right here, and he really likes to do it when I'm going down a hill talking about Sugarloaf. Now, I try my best not to let that happen, but I have hit somebody with a tree before. So, this is my warning to you guys. Let's try it, right?
Let's try it.
Come on, guys.
Arms and legs. You're going to
Keep your arms and feet inside the vehicle at all times.
Good boys. Get up. Grab. We did it. Don't worry, guys. I have my driver's license. Alright, so Fort Holmes up on the hill was actually originally named Fort George. That's because it was built by the French. Now, that's a little bit weird, right? Because usually it was the British or English that took up residence on the island here. But the French were here because of the War of 1812. Now, in 1812, there was a messenger sent to warn the 56 soldiers we had at Fort Mackinac that there was a war going on. Now, that messenger never actually made it. Something happened to him along the way. So our soldiers didn't know that there was a war happening until another messenger showed up. The French. The French marched up the backside of Fort Mackinac, where we have a little bit of a blind spot. They surrounded the fort with 500 soldiers and said, "Hey, good morning. You're outmanned, out-armed. We're going to take the fort from you." So our 56 soldiers looked at those 500 men and said, "All right, have a good day." The French took our fort. Now in 1814, we tried to get our fort back. We tried 3 different attempts. The first thing is we pulled a ship up to the shoreline and tried to fire cannons at Fort Mackinac. Now our cannons weren't very powerful, so all we did was put a couple dents in Marquette Park. Now the second thing is we tried to do exactly what the French did to us. We were like, alright, now we know that there's a blind spot behind Fort Mackinac, so we'll just march up the backside and take it from them. Now, the French saw that coming. They knew there was a weakness in Fort Mackinac, so they had already gone to the highest point on the island and built their own fort, which was Fort Holmes, or Fort George at that point. So they saw us coming from miles away, especially because we decided to do it in broad daylight. Don't ask me why. Now, our last attempt is we tried to stage a naval blockade and block all incoming trade. Now, if you know anything about the French Navy in the 1800s, you'll know that wasn't our best idea. We lasted all of one day before they took our ships and used them against us. So, we never actually got Fort Mackinac back by force. We got it back in a peace treaty after the war had already ended. Sorry. So, what is happening now? We are going down what we like to call on the island Brake Check Hill. We call it that because this is a very steep hill. All of our carriages are fit with a hydraulic brake system, so my foot is on the brake right now to make sure that our carriage doesn't go out of control. But if my brakes were to fail, emergency exits are to the left and to the right. Rock and roll. I'm just kidding. Like they probably told you on the first part of your tour, our horses can pull between 3 and 5 times up their weight. They can hold back 6 times their weight, which means they can hold 45,000 pounds on their neck. Boys. I was like making that joke. Okay. Now we're coming up on Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf Road. You can't actually see Sugarloaf from the carriage, which is a bit of a bummer because Sugarloaf is my personal favorite spot on the island. But it's just down that road. Sugarloaf is really neat. It's a really large rock with a small cave in it. And in the 1800s, our soldiers would go into that cave, they'd scrape their hand along the wall and come up with a big handful of honey. That's because we had thousands and thousands of honeybees living in that cave. Now we don't have those bees anymore, but we do have a small population of the brown-nosed bat. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with the white-nosed fungus, so it's wiped out a lot of our bat population. But we still have a group of about 40 bats in there, and they're doing pretty alright. Come on, Grub, get up. Now there is some Native American lore that goes along with Sugarloaf. So the Native American sky god, his name is Kitchi-Manitou. Remember that name because I'm going to say a whole lot, Grub Stewart. The sky god was said to come down every single year and give one person one wish. So one year Kitchi-Manitou comes down, he decides on a man, he says, "Alright, what is your wish for me?" Now, get you Manitou, easy, Richard. Hold on, Richard. Testing my patience. Bye-bye. So, this man looks at Getchy Manitou and he says, I want to live forever. Now, Getchy Manitou is incredibly offended because everybody knows that only the gods can live forever. So he says, I'll be back in 1 year, and you better have a better wish for me. So Getchy Manitou leaves. He does whatever sky gods do for a year. Then he comes back and he says, alright, what is your new wish? Again, the man looks at Getchy Manitou and he says, I want to live forever. Now again, Getchy Manitou is incredibly offended, but this time he says fine, and grants the man immortality. But as the years go by, the man's skin starts to get harder and harder, and he gets larger and larger until eventually he can't fit into his own house. Now it said that he started to climb to the highest hills he could find every single night, and he would yell at the sky, say, Getchy Manitou, please come down and take this purse away from me. But Getchy Manitou never returned. So on this man's last night, he was climbing up one of those hills, but halfway up, his skin got so hard that he couldn't take another step. So he turned to yell at the sky, and he froze like that forever. So if you do visit Sugarloaf, it looks like a man sitting there, screaming at the sky. Really happy story, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Easy. Now once we get to the bottom of the hill and I can hear you guys over these rattling chains. Alright, so here's what I like to ask you guys if you have any questions. Questions, comments, Yelp reviews, anything. Alright, cool. So there is going to be a point at the end of oh, what's up?
Do you have livers and buried in that cemetery?
Yes, so there are a couple requirements to be buried in that cemetery. One, you have to live here, or you have to be paying taxes for a certain amount of time, or you have to have a certain number of family members on the island. Yeah. Or you have to be a celebrity. I think we have 3 celebrities buried in there. Get up. But there is going to be another point near the end of the tour where I ask you guys for questions again. And at that point, I really need you guys to ask me for questions, because I don't have a whole lot to say, and it gets a little bit awkward. So, counting on you guys. Alright? But I'll talk about our horses a little bit. This actually isn't my usual team. I usually drive a team of 3 white percheron horses called the Cavalry. Okay. I have driven the Groves about 10 days. So I always make it a point to learn a little bit about my team. So Richard in the middle, if you guys can't tell, he's the baby of the team. He's 9 years old. PK and Grub on the outside, they are both 14. Richard, chill out, dude. So we get our horses into the island when they're 5 years old, and we train them here ourselves. Now, typically when they come in, they're teamed with another horse, and they're rarely ever re-teamed. Now, obviously Richard is a bit of an exception, and that's because he actually used to be on the front part of the tour. He had a Belgian teammate named Dolly, but Dolly actually did get a leg injury that prevented her from pulling anymore. So she was sent to the mainland. She now actually works at a cancer rehabilitation center for children, which is kind of neat. Actually, a lot of draft horses work in cancer rehab. That's where she is, and that's why she's here. Now, PK and Grub have been pulling together for about 9 years, so they're pretty familiar with each other. But what's happening now is we are pulling through a limestone quarry. So you can see all these weird ditches and divots here and some exposed limestone with moss growing over it. That's because this is a place where soldiers and builders would come to extract limestone from the ground. But in the 1800s, they didn't have any big construction equipment, so how did they move all of that limestone? Well, again, great question. Thanks for asking. I'll answer you right after this commercial break. Because what we're doing now is we're pulling up on Arch Rock. So we're going to take a 10-minute break here because I can't exactly drive my horses up to the arch. It does have to be exactly 10 minutes though, because I'm on a schedule. I get in trouble if I'm back late. I do not get in trouble if I'm back on time with less passengers. So, I am going to be calling announcements. I'll say 2 minutes left for Cadia's carriage, 1 minute left, I'm leaving, all that kind of stuff. Right in front of us, you can see that wooden staircase that goes up. The signs say that goes to a place called Nicolet's Watchtower, but the only thing up there is a little plaque that's honestly pretty historically inaccurate. So if you go up there, you can't see anything and you can't hear my announcements. But if you want to get your 55 steps of cardio in today, go right on ahead. I don't personally recommend it though. Arch trunk will be right onto that direction. Those are our bathrooms in that brown building up there. All the way up. Okay. Okay. Alright, I don't think I left anybody, but just in case, if you guys see anybody running behind us, screaming and waving, be polite, wave back.
Just wait.
Oh, get up. So did you guys like the arch?
Yep.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, isn't it? I hope you guys got a whole lot of pictures, because pretty soon those are actually going to be relics. Our rock is actually set to collapse in the next 15 years. We're actually losing it really, really fast. It erodes about 1 inch every single year. It actually gets to be so large. Some of the restaurants here have pictures of people standing on top of the arch with an entire horse and carriage. That's how big it used to be. So if you go to any of the restaurants, look out for those. Now the boring version behind how arch rock formed is erosion. Like I said, the whole island was underwater, there was wind, there was waves, erosion, all that kind of stuff. That's the boring version. Get up. I'll tell you guys the interesting version a little bit later on, because first I want to point out this tree. Now that's a really weird looking tree, right? If you're from the upper Midwest, you might be familiar with why that tree looks like that. We have a really special bird here, it's affiliated woodpecker. Affiliated woodpecker is the largest woodpecker of the species, 1.5 feet tall, got a 3-foot wingspan. They can put holes in trees that can kill a tree in 1 hour. Okay. They actually strike trees at 1,000 times the force of gravity, which I don't really know what that means, but it sounds cool to say. Now, if we try to do that, we just get really big concussions, right? But the woodpecker avoids that because actually it's got a really long tongue. So when it hits trees, it actually pulls that tongue back into its head and wraps it around its brain. That kind of acts as a pillow. Oh my god, to protect its brain. I know it sounds fake, but it's actually 100% true. I was giving this tour last week and someone didn't believe me, so they googled it and they got mad because I was right. So, yeah. Don't worry guys, I do my research. Get up. Come on, bud. So you guys know the drill by now. Really steep hill. We're gonna give the boys a break real quick. Come on, girls. Now, if you guys recall, right before a little commercial break, I was talking about that limestone quarry. Oh. And I said that we didn't have any big construction equipment, right? But we did have the tamarack tree. Now, that's a tamarack tree right there closest to the road. Those trees are really neat because they're actually an oil-based tree rather than a water-based tree, which means they burn really, really hot. So the tamarack tree burns at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So to get that limestone, they'd actually cut down those trees and place it on top of exposed limestone, and they'd burn it for days and days on end. That would make the stone really hot. And then they'd get ice-cold lake water, and they'd dump it on top of the stone. They would actually give it thermal shock, and it would break into small pieces that they could load up onto oxen carts and take off to whatever they were building, like Fort Mackinac or the Old Stone Church. Now we used to have a ton of those tamarack trees on the island, but now we have about 12. And that's because tamarack tree has a really deep root system, but as I said, we only have a couple feet of topsoil here, so those trees have a lot of issues trying to find traction here. So you can see this tree is already doing a little bit of a lean to the right hand side. So in the next 50 years, that tree will definitely come down because it just doesn't have any traction here. Come on, guys. Hey, get up. Grab. Wake up, buddy. But the tamarack tree is a really durable tree. The rings inside are actually in a spiral formation rather than just circles like other trees. So it's really hard to bring down. Actually, do you guys remember the Biddle House downtown? It was built in 1780, but in the 1970s, they were doing construction on that house, and they found out that the entire plumbing system was made out of tamarack wood. So it's still working after almost 200 years. Now they had to to replace it because of some boring building regulations or something like that. But if they hadn't, I would actually still be working today. But here's where I like talking about our wildlife a little bit. I already told you guys about the pileated woodpecker, but we do have more animals. We've got all your basic backyard Michigan animals like the squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks, that kind of thing. But we also have a few coyotes and one fox. I actually got to see him this year. He's really cute. But every year we have a herd of deer. And every year it's a different herd because in the winter time they come across over the ice bridge, and when the ice bridge melts, they get stuck on the island. Now the next winter when the ice bridge forms again, the deer are always the first animals that leave to go to the mainland, and that's because there's not a whole lot of sustenance here for large wild animals. So like I was saying, we always have a different herd. Last year we had a herd of 14 deer. This year we have 6. We have 5 does and 1 buck. We named him Lucky. Okay. Now, all of our bigger animals usually stay on the other side of the island because it's a lot quieter back there. So it's really rare to actually see them. We actually have a girl who's been working here for 3 years, and she saw her first deer 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of how rare they are. One year we did have a black bear that crossed over on the ice bridge. We decided to let him stay for a little while and see what would happen, but he started going downtown, carrying our horses. We had to tranquilize him and send him back home. He's actually named after my boss, who was Dale the Bear. So, okay. But now is my personal favorite part of the tour because now it's story time with Katia! Let's try that one more time. It's story time with Katia! Yay! That's what I like to hear. Love that energy. Anyway, so once upon a time, there was a very powerful Native American chief, and he had a gorgeous daughter. Her name was She Who Walked Like the Mist. Now everybody in the village wanted to marry his daughter because she was so beautiful and so kind. So they'd show up to her house, they'd bring her expensive presents, take her on fancy dates, all that kind of thing. Kind of like the Bachelorette. But every time somebody offered their hand in marriage to Misty, she'd look at them and she'd go, no thank you. Now Misty didn't know why she didn't want to marry any of these people, because she was of marrying age and she wanted a spouse, but she just didn't like any of them. So one day she was walking out by the lake, lamenting about her life, because everything's so hard when everybody loves you, right? So she's walking by the lake and she hears a really loud noise. That noise is actually the son of Gitchie-Manitou himself, there's that name again, falling out of the sky right in front of her. He walks up to her and he says, She who walks like the mist, I've been watching you. Great first line, right? I've been watching you and I think you are very beautiful and very kind-hearted. I'm in love with you and I want to bring you to the spirit world and marry you. Now Misty is looking at this guy and she goes, wow, he is hot. But I don't know if I want to go to the spirit world and leave my family here. So she tells him she'll think about it, and she goes home to tell her dad. She goes, I've met a man. He's so excited. She goes, who is it? A doctor? A lawyer? A farmer? Anybody with a job? She goes, no. He's a sky god. So her brother gets upset because you can't marry a sky god. He has no financial income. So as you do when you're upset with your kids, he takes her to an island and chains her to a rock. He says, all right, Misty, I'll be back in 3 days. You better have changed your mind by then, or you are no daughter of mine. So Misty is sitting there on that rock for 3 days, thinking about it. She goes, I was hesitant to marry my sky god because I didn't want to leave my family behind. But here I am, sitting on this rock, and my family has left me behind. So her father comes back and he goes, all right, have you changed your mind? She goes, heck no, Dad. I'm going to marry my sky god. So he says, you are no daughter of mine, and he leaves her there on the island. Now Misty is sitting there for 2 weeks. She's crying, and it said that her tears were so full of heartbreak that they started to weaken the stone under her. And eventually that stone got so soft that her sky god boyfriend was able to break through from the other side, pick her up, and take her back to the spirit world where they lived happily ever after. And that is how our rock was born. Yeah, I don't know the moral of that story, like, listen to your dad, don't listen to your dad, marry a sky god, I don't really know, but I feel like to tell it. But now it is your guys' time to shine, because questions. I am so disappointed.
What brought you to Mackinac Island?
What brought me to Mackinac Island? Good question, I love talking about myself. So I actually just graduated from New Mexico State University, got my degree in tourism. I've been working with horses my entire life, so when I found out about this place, it was kind of perfect for me. to get here. I get into the negative 40s.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you stay here then?
Do I stay here?
No.
Oh no. I'm from New Mexico. I don't think I could survive a winter here. Okay, step up. Yeah, I'm only here for 7 more days actually. Sadly enough. Anybody else? Me, horses, history, anything? I'm from Albuquerque, right in the middle. My university was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Okay.
You plan on coming back?
So originally this was supposed to be a one-time thing, but the more I stay here, the more I kind of fall in love with it. So we'll see. I'm kind of waiting to see where everything takes me. I'm hoping to go to Guatemala for 3 months, and after that, I'm going to try to find a job in Spain.
A lot of countries out there.
Yeah, there's at least a couple.
Have you hiked here on the island?
What was that?
Have you hiked here?
Have I hiked here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love hiking here. We work 14-hour days typically, so we don't have a whole lot of time, and we work 6 days a week. So on our off days, we kind of just sleep a lot. So there have been times where we've gone hiking. I have definitely not hiked the entire island. There's so many hiking trails here. I think there's about 80 miles of hiking trails here. I don't think I've gotten even close to half of that. But it is gorgeous. I always recommend the hike out to Sugarloaf. It's incredible.
Well, have you swam in the water then?
Yes, I have.
Oh my
It's
god.
actually really, really nice. It's really cold, but after a couple minutes, you get used to it. It's so nice.
Because you're
Especially on
froze.
days like this. But you have to be careful where you swim because the current's really, really strong. So it's kind of dangerous in some parts. Out by British Landing, there's like no current out there. It's really nice.
Oh,
That's a nice hike too.
yeah. What are you going to do? Where are you going?
Yeah, I'm actually doing an immersive language program there and volunteering with rescue horses. It's my goal to be quadrilingual. I'm starting with Spanish, and then I'm going to be learning Arabic and Indonesian. Yeah. Good question. Thank you guys for your questions. I do actually have something to point out now. So we have just passed Greeny Grove. Earlier I told you guys that there are no campfires on the island whatsoever, no exceptions. I lied. Greeny Grove is our one exception. Now, Greeny Grove is a little fire pit, and it is for scout use only. So we have a lot of different scouts that come to the island, and when they do come here, they can use that fire pit. But they're always surrounded by a group of firefighters when they do it. It's kind of interesting. That White House over there is actually our scout's barracks. So if they come to the island, they can stay there. Actually, Gerald Ford stayed there when he was a Boy Scout. Easy, Richard. Gerald Ford was actually the only president who visited us while he was in office. But what's happening now is we're coming up on Fort Mackinac. So this actually ends your tour today, but pay attention because there are 3 different places that I can drop you guys off. The first one is Fort Mackinac. It's about a $13 entrance fee, and after you tour the fort, it's about a 3-minute walk downtown. The second place I can drop you off is the Governor's Summer Residence. Now that is the fastest way downtown. It's about a 2-minute walk, and if you aren't touring the fort, I do recommend that. But if you have mobility issues, I do recommend coming with me until my third stop. That's Surrey Hill.